So the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, has been in the news a lot in the past few weeks in the run-up to the budget, calling into question some of Rachel Reeves's more optimistic projections about proceeds from various proposed taxes. So is it playing a useful role in keeping governments honest? But since it was created by George Osborne back in 2010, the OBR has been the source of considerable controversy around the accuracy of its prognostications. I shouldn't have put prognostication in my introduction. And it's another unelected body that tends to determine what elected politicians are able to do, rather than politicians perhaps driving the process. It's notable that Liz Truss's failure to refer to the OBR when setting her budget is held partly responsible for her rapid downfall. So that's briefly the context for this discussion. I'm delighted to have two Battle of Ideas veterans to discuss it. So first to speak would be Catherine McBride on my right. She's an economist, a fellow of the Centre for Brexit Policy. I very much enjoy Catherine's articles for Briefings for Britain, where she does deep dives into UK trade statistics. I don't get out much. And then secondly is Professor Vicky Price. She's Chief Economic Advisor and Board Member for the Centre for Economics and Business Research, and she's the author of Women versus Capitalism, which you can buy on the bookstall. So without any further ado, Catherine.
Hi. I believe that the OBR has a very important job. I think scrutinising government policy, government financial systems, government plans is a very important one. And it's one that the media used to do. And lots of different media institutions with different attitudes to economics would do it very well. Unfortunately, that's all changed, and now we have a media that is interested in clickbait, they're interested in headlines, and they are interested in quick copy and will not wait around to hear the real answer. They want the quick answer. The problem with the OBR, well, it has a lot of problems, and as Rob said in his introduction, which he sent to me about today's topic, was that the OBR was created to take, and I quote, take the political bias out of the economic forecasting and restore credibility to government fiscal policy. And I think it's very hard to suggest that the OBR has no political bias of its own, even if it's not adopting the government's political bias. Personally, I see it has three primary problems. The first one is that it is a government body rather than a commercial one. Because within the City of London, and including Vicky's CEBR group and a lot of others, we have some incredibly good forecasting companies that actually sell their ability to forecast to companies. Also, if you've ever worked in a large multinational, you'll know they have finance departments. I used to work in one where we had to work out how many goods we'd be selling, how many things we needed to import, how many people we needed to work in the company. All of this was forecasted very accurately, and we updated our forecasts all the time. And the other issue, I used to work in a derivative markets, making markets and derivatives. You are constantly tweaking your hedging. It's a constant thing. But the problem with the OBR is because it is not commercial and it's political, they never seem to tweak anything. They make a prediction and it can be wrong, and wrong again, and they don't seem to change. And I find that's the second problem with the OBR, is that the media believes them. And the media loves publishing what the OBR said without question. And then the media is equally shocked when the OBR is wrong, again, without questioning why that keeps happening. And the third problem with the OBR is that it is coming out of a very narrow field of experience. And that's, I'm actually on a scrutiny committee. I'm on the Trade Department's Trade and Agriculture Commission. I get to scrutinise the trade deals. And our commission has 12 people, of which 3 are trade lawyers. I'm the only economist. We've got 3 people who are free traders, including me. We've got 3 people who are protectionists, including someone who works for the National Farmers Union. And we're scrutinising trade deals from an agricultural point of view. We've got people who are experienced in pesticides, people who are experienced in food standards. We've got people who work in people from Scotland, because agriculture is a devolved administrative thing. So we have people from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. And all of these voices come together to produce a very good scrutinisation of the trade deals. Unfortunately, if you look at the OBR, you will see 6 people. I was going to start my talk with hands up, anyone who can name the 6 people who are on the advisory commission of the OBR. Anyone? Except Vicky. That'll be cheating. I know she'll know their names. But most of you won't even know who they are. But they all have backgrounds in things like the Treasury, the IMF, central banks, not just the UK's central bank, but also US, the United Nations, the FCA. Some of them are on the boards of very large corporations. But none of them have an entrepreneurial background. None of them have ever established a business, set up a business, run their own business. The OBR also has a think tank round table. But you won't be surprised to see that the 4 think tanks that they get on their round table are the Institute of Fiscal Studies, the Institute of Government, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, and the Resolution Foundation. These are all think tanks that I would consider to be on the left. I think even Vicky would consider them to be on the left. But why isn't the Taxpayers Alliance, the Adam Smith Institute, the IEA, or the CPS also on their think tank group? Okay. And my favourite bugbears, which may come up in the questions, is the OBR's completely fictitious reports about Brexit. And I can explain to you exactly how they came up and how they got it so wrong. And maybe someone will ask me a question about that, and I'll go into very boring details. But that is, they don't have anyone on the OBR who understands UK trade. And yet they have made some of the most wild and ridiculous projections about what would happen to UK trade after we left the EU. And most of those were made 3-4 years before we left the EU. So before the trade and agriculture, the trading and cooperation agreement was written. And they were made before we knew the rules of origin of that agreement. And somehow the OBR has decided not to alter that 4% change, even though we now know that everything those companies would have predicted has changed. They haven't changed their prediction. The OBR stuck with the 4%. And so that is my bugbears with the OBR, is that they have their own bias in economic forecasting, and they will not adjust their projections when things are clearly wrong. And so when you say, should we give them more power to determine government spending? I would say only if we also change the whole way the OBR is worked out, because they need to have a much more diverse opinions, experience, and economic knowledge. And for that, I think we need to maybe operate as the CMA does, where there is a constant rotation of people on the CMA. Because the CMA is the Competition and Market Authority, and they review takeovers. And, you don't have this fixed 50 economists working under 6 people who are there indefinitely, maybe for the rest of their life. That is creating the bias, and that's the problem. If you're going to give them more power, great, but also make them more accountable, which they're not. And make them diversify, force them to diversify.
Okay, thank you very much. Lee?
I wasn't actually sure what arguments Catherine was going to use. We often agree on quite a lot of things. We disagree on Brexit, but, we can accept that. There are some healthy disagreements out there. And the OBR's role on that as well. But I think you can indeed criticise having an independent body, in inverted commas, the way the OBR is, of perhaps not actually being that independent. So I wouldn't in fact worry about technocrats, which I think is more or less what the issue about the OBR was that was referred to by Liz Truss when she decided not to go and talk to them before her disastrous mini-budget, and saying that there was so much Treasury bias in it and Treasury orthodoxy in it, which would have distorted what their views would be on her policies. So we saw what happened. So it's the thing to say is that it's not there necessarily in order to make any decisions. It's there to provide some backdrop and check. That is what it does. You may get its economic forecast wrong, like everybody else. But it is there to check the extent to which the fiscal rules set by the government, they don't set the fiscal rules. We may, in fact, see fiscal rules change on the budget day, on the 30th of October. But they're there to say, on the basis of the information you have given us, which is very often incomplete by the government, do we think that the fiscal projection you're making is going to indeed raise the amount of revenue you think it's going to raise? And do we think that just on the growth forecast we have, there will be enough tax raised more generally across the economy to meet the rules that you've set yourself for the foreseeable future? That's what it does. There is a whole government economic service, of which I used to be joint head, which is there to look at the cost-benefit of each project, each expenditure, do impact assessments, including regulatory impact assessments. There are 1,500 economists out there who are supposed, including the Bank of England ones, who are supposed to be doing precisely that job. And that analysis is then presented to the Treasury. A lot of that analysis is then given to the OBR as well. The OBR is full of Treasury people. What it has done by being set up is it's taken away the non-transparency that used to exist when I worked in one government department, which was the trade and industry one. Yeah. We had great difficulty convincing the Treasury that our work was, in fact, going down along the right lines in order to decide whether one particular objective we're trying to meet would be met by this particular project or this money being spent, let's say, export finance, whatever we should be doing with this. And the Treasury would just not come back with any convincing arguments. So they're all going to say, no, we don't actually believe this, and we had to work very, very hard to convince them. It's easier having an OBR, which is supposedly independent, even though it's full of Treasury people, which is transparent and can have these arguments publicly. And the new rule, which is now being established by this new government, is that they can also make comments during the financial year on whatever other crazy policies perhaps may come out of this government or had come out of the previous government and say, actually, this is not sustainable. So, for example, some of the cuts in national insurance contributions of the previous government were not necessarily fully costed. What the compensation scheme would be for Horizon scandal sub-postmasters hadn't really been properly entered into whatever was going to be part of government spending. The increase in public sector wages was not included in this. Now, the OBR will be able, for some spending which is above 30 billion, to actually say this is just not in line with your fiscal rules. But all it can do is argue whether, both in the short and long term, the policies will meet some of those rules. And it's recently warned that if we carry on as we are with all this health expenditure and everything else, we're going to end up with a debt-to-GDP ratio of 270% in 50 years, by 2050, or in 50 years' time, which is a real issue for the UK. To finish this argument, if we have a problem with the OBR, then we have a problem with the Bank of England, which is also supposedly independent, but has been given a target of 2%, and is now following it to such an extent that the economy is suffering. So we have very high interest rates, which are the same level they were 3 years ago when inflation was at the same rate as it is now, and then interest rates were 0.15%. Now they are 5%. And we seem to think that that's fine. We can have an independent Bank of England following the 2% target, and they can really affect the economy very, very substantially. I mean, frankly, the OBR, even at its worst, cannot affect the economy as badly as the Bank of England is doing right now. Thank you.